Hello, everyone. My name is Ramses de Leon, and I'll be your co-host for this session. Again, please remember to maintain your microphones and video turns off for respect to our speaker. The study that he will present is titled The Road to Supernormality, a Biological Perspective. It will be presented by Alejandro Álvarez, who is doing his PhD in evolutionary biology. He's also a fellow member of the Parapsychological Unit of Research, Dissemination, and Education, and a founding member of the Research Center for Sintergia and Consciousness. So, Alex, are you ready to share your screen?
I'm ready, my friend.
Awesome. So without further ado, I'll clear the stage for you. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Okay. So, as Ramses said, my talk is called The Road to Supernormality, a Biological Perspective. It is a theoretical proposal for the development of psychic abilities, or as it is most commonly known, PSI, which involves extrasensory perception that comprises telepathy, clairvoyance and precognition, and also psychokinesis. So, we need to begin by defining the term supernormal. Just as a bit of historical background, it is a term coined by Frederick Myers, one of the founders of the British Society for Psychical Research, during the late 19th century. And he defined it as a series of phenomena governed by natural laws that heralded a future stage in human evolution. If we look at the etymological roots of this term, we see that it means above the normal or exceeding the normal or average. This completely devoids the term from all of the paranormal or supernatural elements. So if we see this, making an analogy, we can see this as a continuum. For example, in the case of musical ability, we see a continuum of this ability. We have that many individuals, most of the population has only a basic levels of disability. Almost all of us can play an instrument, but there will only be very few people that do this at an exceptional level. For example, a Mozart, a Beethoven, Johann Bach. This regarding musical ability, they would be considered supernormal people. And today, well, the same could apply to psychic abilities. Perhaps many people has a basal level of disabilities, but there are only very few individuals that could be considered super psychics. And today, such phenomena are regarded as anomalies or unbelievable, but as we improve the understanding of ourselves, our capacities, and the physical world, it's very likely that the supernormal will become completely normal. So, well, during the last century, there have been great advances to try to explain how psychic phenomena could occur. But there's still a great void regarding the plausible biological explanations, although more attention has been paid in recent years. But something that often goes unnoticed is the whole set of situations prior to a person developing psychic abilities, which in the superhero lore is known as the origin stories. But, when we look at the superhero universe, we see that every single hero has a specific origin story, which is the set of situations that result in that superhero developing superpowers. And although each of these stories is unique, we can see common elements if we analyze a set of them. For example, the radiation is a common theme in the superhero origin stories, but it is a quite general term. It could refer to radiation from a nuclear accident, from a radioactive source, from cosmic energy, or from an unknown source of energy. So when we look at the origin stories of real people that claim to have psychic abilities, we also find some common elements that allow us to group these stories into different categories. And here is this is what I call the roads to supernormality, the situations that lead to the development of psychic abilities in different people. I have identified 8 different situations that are the 8 more common situations from which people consider they have obtained supernormal abilities. And I group them into 4 different categories. And altogether, this suggests a common basis, specifically a biological trait involved in the development of psychic function. The first one has to do with inheritance. Some people are said to be psychic born, although sometimes the development of psychic abilities occurs at a later stage of their lives. It is complicated to evaluate if a person was born with psychic abilities or if he acquired at a later stage, because many times they manifest them at a later stage of their lives. But a genetic component could be argued if some of their blood relatives, their parents or their grandparents, also possess psychic abilities, and this is usually the case. We have evidence coming from different surveys, from psi-oriented tasks, and also from genetic analysis. This is a brand new kind of evidence that was published a few months ago, in which a team led by Helene Wabe et al. Found a specific gene variant that was present in people with psychic abilities and absent in those that are well, non-psychics. So the second category involves what I identify as stressful situations. These are situations that involve psychological and or physiological stress. And here we find 4 different psi-leading scenarios. UFO or UAP encounters. UAP stands for unidentified aerial phenomena. And here I would also add encounters with other kinds of non-human entities, which is a common theme in the folklore of many societies. For example, encounters with elves, with fairies, among other entities. Also, near-death experiences, deep psychological dramas. For example, in some poltergeist cases, which it is believed that the agent of causation is not a non-human entity, but a person, commonly a child or a teenager, that is under deep psychological stress. This is known as recursive spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK. And finally, a lightning strike, which is a very common theme in some shamanic societies, in which sometimes the lightning strike is the final test for the person that is in the process of becoming a shaman. If he survives a lightning strike, well, his training will be completed. And in other cases, it happens just by accident, but after the person is struck by lightning, he or she develops abilities that the elder people of the village consider to be necessary for a shaman. So this person can, in that moment, begin his training for becoming a shaman. In the next category, which involve, I group directed or controlled situations. And here we have people who have never had any type of psychic ability and through training managed to succeed at different side tasks. For example, in the case of the Stargate project, there were several volunteers that were initially classified as normal, non-psychic individuals. They said that they have never participated in any kind of ESP tasks, but after some time of training, they become very good remote viewers. Some of them were among the most successful remote viewers of this project. And we also have meditators who spontaneously experience psychic phenomena. Not necessarily experienced meditators, but many people that are beginning their meditation lessons report this. And there a common theme between this category and the last one, the stressful situations category, is that these situations somehow impact on the physiology of the person. For example, in the case of near-death experiences, a lightning strike, obviously, and some UFO encounters that involves some sort of radiation, there is a physiological, a change in the physiology of these people. And also, in the case of meditation, it's known that this could have a beneficial impact in our physiology. For example, it can retard aging or can suppress the secretion of several stress-related molecules, or also have an impact in the gene expression patterns of some genes. And finally, our last category is what I call the induced category. Here, people develop supernormal abilities by taking different substances, mainly psychedelic substances, such as DMT, LSD, mescaline, among others. David Luke is one that has published many papers which he makes a he investigates the relationship between psi and drugs, and there is also additional evidence given the importance of the use of drugs in public health. There have been many studies that investigate the relationship between drugs and the effects that they can have specifically on the brain. And some studies have found that several drugs can modify or have an impact in the neural plasticity of the brain. This can modify the neuronal connections that are present at a specific region of the brain. So, what do we have here? We have 8 different situations grouped into 4 different categories that share the same outcome, and this outcome is the development of the same supernormal abilities, ESP and PK. So given that all of these situations somehow modify the physiology of the person, they must impact on a biological trait. Well, in the case of people that are psychic born, have what they call psi genes, it is somehow easy to understand. The gene is normally expressed, and this expression results in the development of supernormal abilities. But what happens with people that are not psychic born? Well, what this suggests is that such structure is very likely to be the same in also in these people, and there is an evolutionary reason for this. When there is a trait that has a specific function and it performs this function in an optimal way, it is quite unlikely that a new trait would appear that performs the same function. This would represent a very high evolutionary cost. So the different evolutionary forces usually work with what they have. So if there is a structure that is responsible for supernormal abilities, it's more likely that this structure would be the same in every person developing these abilities, no matter if they have the right genes or if they reach this point through different situations like the ones I mentioned here. And also, this suggests that more instead of having the right genes, these of the other people, non-psychic born people, could present different genetic or epigenetic regulation that leads to the same outcome. So I propose here two possible mechanisms which are likely to be involved. The first one is genetic robustness, which is the persistence of an organismal trait under perturbations, and it ensures the stability of phenotypic traits that are constantly exposed to genetic and non-genetic variation. And there is a similar mechanism, which is called genetic compensation, in which an organism with a deleterious mutation does not develop the expected adverse phenotype due to compensatory actions of another gene or genes. And this can restore the normal physiological function. So the difference between these two mechanisms are this. In the case of genetic robustness, it is due to redundant or evolutionarily related genes, which are known as paralogous genes. And also it could be due to a tightly regulated cellular network, because in many cases, some genes can be part of a large metabolic signaling or transcriptional network. And if one of the genes of this network has a mutation and is inhibited, the other genes from the network can rescue this function. And in the case of the genetic compensation, there are two possible models that could account for this process. One of them involves DNA damage response, in which there are changes in the chromatin organization, which uncovers a region that would not be accessible in other situations. And in this region, there could be a gene that compensates the mutation of the other gene. And also, there can be several pathways that involve different kind of RNA molecules that could be involved in restoring the mutated function. So just to try to make clearer this last point, here we have different organisms with different mutations and different genes. For example, if we look at this, in the case of the zebrafish, we have a mutation in this gene, but the mutant phenotype has minor or no vascular defects. This is because there is another gene, which is not evolutionarily related, this one, that compensates the loss of function of this gene. So when there is a mutant, it is likely that it will not develop deleterious effects. But what happens when this is the gene is not mutated but only attenuated at expression level? We see that there are severe vascular defects, and this is because this other gene has not been expressed, because this one is expressed but attenuated. So I think this might be somehow confusing, but I try to explain it better. What we have here are two different scenarios leading to supernormality. The easy one is the one that involves psychic-born people. In those people, their necessary genes are normally expressed in a specific brain region, and there is an innate development of sight. This would operate like any other trait in the organism. But what happens in non-psychic people, non-psychic-born people? There are situations whose effects are known to produce deep physiological modifications, ones that I showed you, the grouped into stressful, directed, or induced. And there's also alteration of gene regulation and or expression patterns, which could be due to genetic robustness or genetic compensation. For example, suppose that the psi genes, so the genes involved in psychic development, express in a specific brain region. Psychic-born people will have this normally, but non-psychic-born people would not have these genes. So there must be another way or ways that have the same effect, that are reflected in the same brain region that permits psychic functioning. I think this is going to be clearer in the next slides. But what is the more interesting part of this is that the brain region responsible for psychic functioning must be the same in psychic-born and non-innate psychics. Because of the evolutionary reasons that I told you before, it would be very expensive to that each of these situations activates a different region, different brain region that is responsible for the same function. So what is more likely is that there is only one brain region responsible for psychic development, and that this region is the same in both psychic-born people and non-psychic-born. So this is just a proposal, but fortunately we have some rudimentary evidence that was revealed a few years ago by this journalist and Jacobsen, who published this book about the history of the Stargate project. And she managed to interview different people that were involved in this project, but that were also active today. And one of these scientists is Dr. Christopher Green, who is currently working with patients that have been exposed to UFO encounters or UAP encounters, but that have been affected, physiologically speaking, because of these encounters. So he began to perform different medical tests, including functional magnetic resonance of the brain region. And he found a common anomaly in all of these patients that was absent in the control group. It is a higher fiber density between the head of the caudate nucleus and the putamen. It looks something like this. And this is not present in normal. This is the normal phenotype. This is the hypermorph or the experimental phenotype. But among his experimental subjects, there are people that also took part in the Stargate project that have not had UFO encounters, but they were very good remote viewers. Perhaps they only went through different training sessions to succeed at that ability, or it could also be that they have some family members or other family members that also have this ability. And among these subjects was Joseph McMonigal, who is perhaps one of the best remote viewers in the world. And the interesting part about him is that he had a near-death experience before joining this program, a very deep near-death experience, I would say, including a out-of-body experience. So what we are seeing here is a group of people that could be grouped into the 8 scenarios that I am suggesting. We have at least three of these situations: the UFO, UAP encounters, the near-death experience, and well, the development of psychic abilities through either training or through an inheritance of this ability. But we see that they have an impact on the same region of the brain. So this adjusts to what I proposed in the previous slides. So why the caudate nucleus? Although the same anomaly is found among all these people and absent in the control group, is there any reason for this brain structure that would suggest that it has a role in anomalous cognition? Well, if we look at the normal functions of this structure, we see that it is involved in motor and cognitive functions like mnemonic processing, language, dreaming, emotions, among others. But in the last few decades, other functions have been found that are related to this structure and that are thought to be related with anomalous cognition processes. For example, decision-making, intuition, and superior cognitive function, which in different studies are found in people having supernormal abilities. But this is not a new idea. In fact, the first one who suggested that the caudate nucleus could be involved in psychic functions were Soviet researchers during the late 70s and the 80s. But it was picked up by Dr. Christopher Green and also by geneticist Gary Nolan from Stanford University. And in his current sample, they have, as I said, people that with UFO or UAP encounters, people with anomalous cognition, and well, in the case of Joseph McMonigal, a near-death experience. The question is, could any of the other situations lead to this same outcome? Not just the development, supernormal abilities, but the development of this specific brain anomaly between the caudate nucleus and the putamen? Well, for several drugs and psychological stressors, it is known that they can induce brain hyperthermia, which is a local increase of brain temperature, and also an increase in extracellular dopamine. The question is, could this have an effect on neuronal connectivity? It is likely that they could have. And also, it is known that the region of the basal ganglia, in which the caudate nucleus is a region with great plasticity, which means that it's quite easy to form new neuronal connections. So, well, this remains to be seen. And if any point of their study, they include people which, for example, reports acquiring psychic abilities only by taking drugs or by doing meditation. Well, this could help us to confirm that specific structure is somehow related to the development of disability, and if it is common in all people having this ability. And finally, what can we conclude? Well, the first thing is that it is unlikely that a single gene or several polymorphisms or gene variants are the only explanatory basis of sight. Perhaps this has a lot more to do with the regulation of gene expression than with having or not the right genes. Changes in neuronal connectivity induced by a wide range of situations could lead to sight development, as the caudate extra fibers between the caudate and the putamen suggest. And this could be due to genetic robustness or genetic compensation, or perhaps something else, for example, something that has to do with epigenetic regulation. And we can make use of state-of-the-art methodologies in genetics, in neuroimaging, and in the omics technologies like transcriptomics or proteomics. And this could help us to expand our knowledge on the biology of psychic abilities. And by doing so, I think that we could finally be able to answer a question that has thrilled parapsychologists during many, many decades, which is why sight is so elusive. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Alex. So there's some interesting questions in the chat. Are supernormal abilities transferable?
You mean inherited? That they could be inherited or
well,
passed
the
through...
question is very short, but maybe you can elaborate on the possibilities
well,
of
transferable. I think it refers to if they can be inherited. I think they can. So we have to devoid supernormal abilities from all of the paranormal and supernatural elements. And if we do that, we remain with a series of abilities that, like any other human abilities, have a molecular and genetic basis. So in this case, like happens with other abilities, although not everything relies on the right genes, there could be some genes involved with this process. So if if psychic abilities work in this way, and if it is a genetic component, it would be inherited like any other trait. There is evidence for this. There's a pedigree analysis, which is a family history analysis that was done by Sherry Cohn, a Scottish researcher in the late 90s. He interviewed around 130 different people and found that they all have ancestors, their parents or their grandparents that were before them, that had a specific ability known as second sight, which is a very widespread ability in Scotland, mainly in the Highlands. And she found a consistent pattern of inheritance, which was an autosomal dominant model of inheritance. This means that this trait is not related to the sexual chromosomes. It's not involved sexual chromosomes. So yes, it is. If you remember the study that I mentioned, the one from the team of Helani Wabe, they proposed a specific gene, and additional work could involve looking for that specific gene in the in parents or grandparents or other family members of the people that have this gene, and also report that they have some level of psychic abilities.
Okay, so there's a following question that may be actually related, that maybe you probably have just answered, relating to the possibility of studies regarding the offsprings of individuals who have trained in psychic abilities or had stressful induced psychic experiences, looking for any epigenetic effects. Do you have any comments on this?
Well, this is a very interesting question indeed, because, well, it is the current knowledge in the field of genetics specifically tell us that the situations that you live throughout your life are, if this results in a modification of your genome or of any trait that you have, this would not be inherited. But recent advances in the epigenetics field have shown that yes, if a person has or goes through a situation that modifies their epigenetic markers, this could also be inherited to the next generations. So if putting an example, if a lightning strikes a person, and this results in a change of epigenetic patterns and ultimately in the development of psychic abilities, it could also be passed to the next generation, and also well, 2 or more generations later. I have not considered this, but it is a very important point that could also account for the presence of supernormal abilities.
Well, it will be definitely an interesting point to research on.
Yeah,
so,
sure, definitely.
Do you have any more information regarding if the caudate nucleus and the caudate putamen, if it has been studied in other species? I don't think if in psychic abilities, but if you can comment anything further relating to that.
Yeah, it is interesting because it is a very ancient brain region. It is, like I said, at the center of the brain, and it is present in at least in all vertebrates, in fish, in reptiles, birds, amphibians. It is a conserved structure. And also, I think some arthropods, some insects, have primitive version of this structure, because the genes that are involved in the related to this structure are also present in arthropods. And I think that if we look at other species, well, perhaps this has been done, but I do not have that information right now. But I think it is one of the most conserved structures of the brain.
Okay, so there's a very punctual question regarding your presentation of yesterday and today. So
Okay.
it states that yesterday's talk focused specifically on the gene TNRC18, the one that you exposed yesterday, as being correlated with psi abilities. How does this relate to the first bullet under this presentation conclusions, which states that it is unlikely that a single gene or several polymorphisms are the explanation for psi?
Well, yeah. As I said, this could be the explanation in people that have this specific gene variant. Well, I mean, additional analysis are needed, but well, this could account for psi development in these people. But there are other people that do not have this polymorphism, like has revealed the study of Helen Water. So the question is, why people that do not have this specific genetic component can also develop psychic abilities. And if it all relied on the same explanation with a specific gene variant, this would mean that every people in the world that lives today or that has lived in the past had this gene variant, if that was the only explanation. But it is quite unlikely that this is the case.
Right, as you said yesterday, probably it's more like a network-based genetic phenomena, right?
Yeah, sure. Do I expand more on this, or we go to?
Probably we can go to the next question. If anyone have any additional doubts regarding that topic, you can put it in the chat. So another question is if there is any evidence to suggest that supernormal capabilities are increasing or decreasing within the human population over time, short-term or long-term. I've heard debates about this in both directions, both increasing and decreasing in expression over long-term human evolution. So what are your thoughts?
That's a very interesting question. I have seen all these debates, and it is hard to reach any conclusions yet. Some of them argue that there has been a decrease, for example, because of the extermination of people, gifted people, for example, during the witch hunting period. It is believed that many of the women that were born alive did have were gifted women. So by killing them, many of them could not leave descendants, and well, this would sorry, this would diminish the population of psychic people. But there's also the other, we can look at that the other way around. Today there's more openness for these things, although it is outside of mainstream sciences, not mainstream science. So, there is, I think, in the general population, there is more acceptance of this. There are many schools that teach people how to develop, for example, remote viewing, or to move a side wheel to decay, or any other kind of psychic ability. So there would be more people learning to develop this. If if what I'm proposing here is somehow correct, perhaps the people with there are less people today with the genetic component for psychic development, but it could be that there are more people that develop psychic abilities through the other scenario, the one that involves genetic or epigenetic regulation network.
Sure, that's what you propose, these 8 roads to supernormality. So here's an interesting question. Many genetic traits remain hidden until they are activated. What type of activities or situations might activate a hidden psi trait if it is genetically based? I think you probably mentioned a few.
Yeah, well, this has a lot to do with the other categories that I am proposing. This, for example, let's take meditation. Meditation is a process in which there have been observed many beneficial physiological changes, but it is not a directed process. You do not control which genes are going to be overexpressed or underexpressed. We still do not know everything we need to know about the physiological basis of meditation, but we know that it has very beneficial effects, and there different genes have been identified that change their expression patterns after a few meditation sessions. So, well, this is one type of activity that it could impact directly in the epigenetic component, and by doing so, make this region of the genome accessible to well, to be transcribed and then translated into specific proteins. And also, also if we take stressful situations, it is known that this can also result in the inactivation or modification of several pathways. For example, as secretion of stress-related molecules. So I think in the case of people that are psychic born, it could also be something like this. Perhaps some of them, although they have the genetic component, they do not express it. But if whether a specific event is needed to make this trait expressed, or if it expresses normally, I don't know.
Excellent. So congratulations on the excellent presentation, Alex. I think our program chair, John Cruz, may have some additional comment, remarks, or maybe announcements.
Thank you, Ramses. Alex, it was wonderful to hear your talk, and that last question was mine. You know, I'm very interested that there are some people who may not have these at birth. They may not notice these things, but there might be certain situations that just turn them on. For example, near-death experiences, for example, are one of the things that I often think of, that people have after effects from these, and have people start expressing PK in different times and unusual things. So I think your presentation was very interesting. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Oh, thank you, John, very much. For me, it's an honor to be here presenting this.
Oh, it was great to have you. It's all the talks that we've had here, all the speakers that make this conference so wonderful.